Betonline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Betonline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega cash and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it!
We are here to Field Rockets News. This Rockets Field podcast presented by the Believe Network and sponsored by Bet Online. Of course, I'm your host, LaShar Binkley. You can always find my written work over on Rockets on SI and, of course, on Twitter X. You can find me at Binkley Hoops. And today I want to give a quick recap, really more of a top 3 players that stood out to me in the Rockets 122-113 loss to Utah Jazz. Because, of course, like I say, for every single preseason, I actually put a PSA out on Twitter that you never want to go overboard, especially when we're talking about the team as a whole, because there's so many different rotations. There's so many different lineups that are going into the game. There's a lot of teams that are not even putting in their full game plan. Of course, we heard from Coach Udoka earlier in training camp where he was saying that he would be sitting out multiple veterans each game and monitoring players like Tari Eason and Alperen Sengun who are coming back for injury. Last night, we actually saw the Rockets play 16 out of the 19 guys on the training camp preseason roster. Only 3 players that did not play were Tari Eason, Jeff Green, and Dylan Brooks. And, of course, that meant that Amenthompson was able to slide into the starting role, and he had a really good game. But you never want to go too overboard when it comes to, focusing in on, win-loss record in the preseason. I mean, Coach actually said that himself, that he's not really winning and losing is not his main concern when he's talking about preseason. It's really about getting better each and every game. And that's why I wanted to go over my 3 guys that did stand out, even though the Rockets did lose. There was more than 3 guys, but really these 3 players really, seemed like they were already ready for the regular season. So I want to give a quick recap on those 3 players. And the first player I wanted to talk about was Alperen Sengun, who was probably the most impressive player for both teams last night. We saw, of course, Alperen Sengun last time he was on the court. He was injured in the Sacramento Kings game in March and missed the entire rest of the season. But during the offseason, every time you pretty much saw Sengun, he was working out. He was in the gym, seems like pretty much almost every single day. We also heard that Rockets sent over several player development coaches over to Turkey to work with him for several weeks, and he's talked about how big of a deal that was for him to be able to have the same coach the entire training camp. And this is something I pointed out as well, is that's something to keep an eye on. And the reason why Sengun is going to really get off to another great start this season is because he was able to focus with one coaching staff really for majority of the offseason, unlike other offseason where he would work with his coaches over in Turkey, then come back and work with the Rockets. He worked a lot with just the Rockets coaches, and of course, they went over a lot of things they wanted him to improve on, and some of the things that, of course, he already did really well and wanted to continue to, fine-tune those things. And we saw it last night. I mean, he did a great job just throughout the game, and not just on offense, but also on the defensive end as well, which was probably even more impressive because we know how good he is on the offensive end. But on defense, he looked really good, and this is something that kind of goes with what he told me during Sunday's practice or after Sunday's practice was when I asked him how comfortable he is going out and defending smaller players, like especially guards out on perimeter, because the Rockets were working a lot on their switching defense throughout training camp. So he told me a little bit about that. And also, M.A. talked about this after the game last night. And one of the things he pointed out was how impressed he was with Sengun's defense, how good shape he came in during the off season, and it kind of reflected during the game. So here's a little bit of what he said and a little bit of what Alperen said when I talked to him after practice.
How comfortable do you feel going out in space and guarding smaller guys? We saw you work on a lot, switching out onto the guards out on the perimeter.
I mean, I take care of my body really well this off season, so I'm in a really good position, I feel like. So I can guard anybody in the team right now, and that's a good work for me and trying right now, and we can see in the game.
Yeah, I think he had a really good summer, really good offseason of work, and has gotten himself into tremendous shape. So be able to play on both ends with that effort and intensity throughout. So good carryover from what we've seen from him, throughout the summer and the first 5 practices. And so with how we're trying to play, faster pace, obviously, defensively, with more intensity, it's good to see him do that.
So, of course, you saw it there. You saw what Sengun said. Sengun said that he put a lot of work in on his body. He feels really comfortable being able to switch out on the guards and the smaller forwards in the league when they're trying to run those switches on him. And we saw it last night against the Jazz. You didn't see him getting beat a lot off the dribble. You didn't see him missing his assignments. And when Ime points that out, that lets you know that that's a big deal, because that's one of the things that Ime pointed out a lot throughout last season was he wants his bigs to be able to come out, not play the drop coverage that they were playing before with Coach Silas. He wants to see them come out and put pressure on those guards and be able to come out and switch, so the Rockets don't have to double team, or Rockets don't have to switch up their defense. They're able to play a little bit more of a man-to-man defense even off the switches. So we saw that a lot last night, and to me that stood out even more than his offense. Of course, his offense was great. He had 17 points, was 6-8 from the field, but his defense is really what's going to take him to that next level this year. Of course, also his shooting. He had a really good three-pointer where he kind of slipped the screen. His guy did not come out to the three-point line, and he shot it with confidence. He didn't hesitate at all, and that's something I know he also said during training camp that he was working on. So Sengun looked great last night. He looked like he was already in mid-season form. It looked like he had pretty much no ailments from his injury last season, which is a really good sign. And the fact that Ime had no problem playing him, even though he is coming off an injury, and playing him 20-plus minutes is a really good sign for Sengun going forward. We'll see how much he plays throughout the rest of the preseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he sits out a game. Also, I wouldn't be surprised we see Fred VanVleet sit out a game as well, probably this next upcoming game, because like I said, we saw Dylan Brooks sit out. Wouldn't be surprised if Fred sits out, and maybe we see a Reed or Amenthompson playing the point guard position. Speaking of Thompson, he's another guy that stood out for me last night. I mean, he was great. He got the Rockets' first basket win. Both teams couldn't score to save their lives. He got that basket off a very really nice fast break dunk. He looked, of course, great on the defensive end. He was playing above the rim. He was playing with straight line power. He wasn't hesitating. He was taking the ball right to the basket. And to me, when you're looking at Thompson, it's going to be really hard to get him off the court, even when the Rockets are at full strength, because he does so many things on the court that other Rockets don't necessarily do well. He can defend any person in the paint. He can defend any person out on the perimeter. He can play against centers. He can play against point guards. Of course, the only thing that's holding him back is his shooting. But when you're that athletic and you're that quick off the court, you don't necessarily have to be the greatest three-point shooter. Of course, he has to improve. He can't be a sub 20% three-point shooter, or he's really going to be capped as far as his potential. But if he can just get to 30% from three-point range, I mean, the fact that he does everything else so well already, only in his second year, it's going to be really hard to take him off the court. Like I said last night on Twitter X, I said that it's going to be hard for him not to be playing 25 minutes a game, because he brings so much to the team. And you saw it last night again. I know it's preseason, but if you go back and watch some of the interviews during the off season, pretty much every time you ask another player, hey, who's the one guy that stood out? 9 out of 10, Thompson was definitely one of the names that was mentioned, because everybody said how great of an off season he had. I remember asking him during training camp, how, are you comfortable being able to guard 1 through 5? And he said that yes. I mean, that's something the coach has been working on with. I saw during training camp, he was guarding players like Jeff Green and Thon Maker and had no problem at all guarding those players. They weren't able to back him down in the paint, even trying to shoot over him. And with his expanded wingspan, he made those shots difficult. So Thompson, to me, is really going to be the breakout player for the Houston Rockets this season. And like I said, Rockets going to have to find a way to get him on the court regardless, because he's one of those players that's almost matchup proof. He can play pretty much any position, maybe outside of shooting guard just because of his struggles a little bit with his shot. But anytime he's around that dunker spot and around the basket, he's either going to be getting you a rebound or he's going to be playing above the rim and getting you a dunk off of alley-oops, which we saw a couple of times. So he's definitely another guy that really stood out to me last night. And he's going to be, like I said, he's going to be one of the X factors for the Rockets this season. The third player that stood out to me was, of course, Jaylen Green. I mean, you saw it pretty much is all throughout the first half where he pretty much cannot be stopped. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't over dribbling, something we've seen before in the past with him. He was be able to get to the basket. It was one play with and one play against John Collins where he took it baseline, went up and under John Collins. It was just extremely smooth, no effort, no hesitation. And also, I mean, just his ability to be able to, when it comes down to Jaylen Green, it's going to be a couple of things that's really going to take him to the next level. And one of those things is being able to have a counter move, because we all know how fast Jaylen Green is, especially with his first step, extremely fast, extremely athletic. But when it comes to NBA, for you to be able to take that next step, especially as an offensive type player, you have to have a counter move. We saw that from James Harden, having a counter move all those years, and that's why he was so difficult for defenses to guard. If you have that counter move, I don't care how good of a defender you are, you're not going to be able to stop somebody like a Jaylen Green, who's already probably quicker than 90% of the NBA, can jump over pretty much anybody in the NBA. But if he has a counter move to go with his quickness and his athleticism, that's going to take him to that next level. And we saw a lot of that last night. We all know when it comes to Jaylen Green, what it comes down to. He has to show what he does every March. He has to show that throughout the entire season. And again, yes, it's preseason, but it's a good sign to see him do that in game one of preseason, to where he was, definitely one of the Rockets' best players last night. So he definitely stood out. And one really quick side note, another player that doesn't really show up in the box score, he didn't score a point last night. He did have 4 rebounds with Steven Adams. In his first game after not playing all last season, the picks he set is some of the, biggest picks you're going to see any player set throughout the NBA. I've watched, when I was watching the game, there were several times where Steven Adams was able to get players wide open shots. Now, sometimes he didn't hit the shots, but he was able to get those players wide open shots. And I think that's something that's going to be huge this season, especially as he gets even more into game shape throughout the season. His ability to be able to set those screens and get players wide open shots is going to be a huge factor for the Rockets this upcoming season. So those are 3 players that stood out to me this first game. Like I said, it's not really a big deal when it comes down to wins, losses. It really comes down to how the players perform. So the rotational player for the Rockets performed really well in the first half, and the Jazz were able to get back in the game once the Rockets really started sitting their guys. So that really stood out to me yesterday. We'll be giving you podcasts throughout the entire week. The Rockets won't have their first home game until next week, next Tuesday. So I'll definitely be out at that, bringing you all the post and pregame interviews. So make sure you check that out. And also make sure that you're subscribing to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And also give us those likes, because that definitely helps us with the algorithm. So as usual, we appreciate all the support. And make sure you check out the next episode of Rocket Fuel Podcast.